I'm slightly nervous, as you can see. Obviously, anyone would be when you're sitting next to the man who created the big creation.
There's no need to be nervous, Irene. This is the most picturesque setting I have ever sat in for a book,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a book discussion.
You've stolen my opening line, and you already know that I'm experiencing the defeat right from the opening of the session. So, I want each one of you to just turn back for a second and just see how beautiful this whole place is. We just get desperately caught up with our rituals and what we have to do and Janvi's timelines, and we forget that we are away from choking Delhi with AQI going crazy to 430, and we are sitting in Nainital. So like my yoga teacher told me, आप ऊपर जा रही हैं तो breathe करिएगा और उस breath को hold करके रखिएगा, वापस आके वही आपकी oxygen होगी. So that's what at least all of us are attempting to do. It's 9 degrees in Nainital. And Mr. Swaroop, each one of you all who are sitting in the audience have little bit of Nainital in them. What is your connection with Nainital?
Well, I'm returning to Nainital, believe it or not, after 50 years. Yes, I last remember I came with my parents, and all I remember is V.V. Giri was the President of India at that time. And I remember the parade ground, and I remember, of course, the beautiful lake. And I think Nainital has changed completely since that time. It still retains its original charm, I suppose, but a lot of the infrastructure has changed completely. And the second connection I have to Nainital is that the book previous to this one, The Accidental Apprentice, is set partly in Nainital. And yesterday we had girls from the All Saints Girls College, and we had boys also. And that is also set in a similar kind of a boarding school where my protagonist's father worked as a teacher, and she grew up in Nainital.
And what was the end of that?
Well, then she comes to Delhi, and then other things start happening because, the AQI suddenly depletes. That's what happens.
Okay. Now, it's a very complicated equation today because you're going to wear two hats. Of a diplomat?
Ex-diplomat now. As I said, 3 years ago, you could have said I wore two hats, but no longer now. I retired from the Indian Foreign Service in June 2021. So now I am ex-diplomat and, well, I hope not an ex-writer.
You can never be an ex-writer. So my first question, and definitely we're going to navigate our way very gently through his politics, his diplomacy, which we're not letting go of. But my first question would be that usually all the diplomats, when they write, most of the diplomats like T.C. Raghavan, of late that we saw, and also Mr. Sarna, most of them, or previously Mr. J.N. Dixit, mostly they all wrote about their personal experiences and also otherwise their professional journeys. But you are a completely different kind of a person. You come from diplomacy and you write thrillers. How did all this started off?
No, so I think you can use mine your own experiences for writing fiction if you want to. But for me, the inspiration really was not my own life. The inspiration was everyday life in India. I mean, that is really what is the starting point for all 4 of my novels. What we see happening in India all around us. And as I say, just reading one day's newspaper, just one day, you represent the Indian Express. So just reading one day's Indian Express can give you plots for 4 or 5 different novels. Because so much is happening in our country. I mean, it's just crazy. The other day in the Times of India, I read this incredible story. Or there's this woman, and she had a wayward daughter. And the daughter was, creating all kinds of problems for her. So she sent her off to live with her uncle. And while staying with the uncle, the daughter developed a liaison with a local boy. And the uncle discovered it and said, you are bringing bad name to the family and I'm kicking you out. So he sent her back to her mother. And mother said, this is now the last straw. I cannot live with this daughter. So she says, I have to get this daughter eliminated. So she hires a hitman to murder her own daughter. And the hitman turns out to be this girl's lover. So he goes to the girl and says, your mother has given me a bounty to kill you. And she says, okay, let's kill her. And that's really what happened. I mean, what fiction can top this, tell me? So that's what I'm saying, that, everyday life in India gives you so many ideas for so many different plots.
But there are very few diplomats who have this kind of imagination and creativity. They just capture their imagination and creativity in the kind of writing they do.
No. See, I think all diplomats are creative. After all, the best definition of a diplomat is someone who can tell you to go to hell in such a way that you actually look forward to the trip. So we have to be very creative in how we explain things to our interlocutors, etc. So I think that creativity is inherent in diplomacy. It's just that, some diplomats use that creativity to write books based on their own experiences, in the diplomatic service or on Indian foreign policy. I chose to go slightly different direction and write about, murder and mayhem happening in an entirely fictional universe.
But mostly all your projects, the 4, and I've read 2, but I've read reviews of all. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Swaroop, that, usually diplomats' role is that you make your country or you project your country to look beautiful, bold, and what else? Beautiful, bold, and perfect. But bold for India we can avoid, and we leave that to China. But definitely perfect and beautiful. How come most of your projects are dark and Slumdog, and these are also coming from a place which Khuda na kare you've ever experienced, and also not a landscape that you have. It's a very unidentified space for you. So how come you've written about these things and they've really become masterpieces?
Well, I think if I chose to write a tourist brochure on India, you and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation in Mountain Echoes. Because you see, when you write a novel, you have to be true to the characters that you are writing about. And in my first novel, Slumdog, which became Slumdog Millionaire, I chose to write about the underclass. An 18-year-old waiter who works in Jimmy's bar and restaurant in Kulaba in Mumbai and participates in the biggest quiz show on earth. So obviously he cannot be graduating from the University of Uttarakhand in chapter 3. His life has to traverse through the slums of India, the chawls of India, the bars, restaurants. He has to be doing menial jobs because that is the normal trajectory of such a person. But eventually what I wanted to show was that it does not matter where you come from. What matters is where you are going to. And eventually he ends up going to the biggest quiz show on earth and wins the biggest prize on earth. So the idea was that just because you have had a disadvantage in terms of your growing up, that disadvantage cannot mar you for life. You can remake your life. And in fact, the new novel, The Girl with the 7 Lives, is also about that. It's about resilience and reinvention.
So out of 4, 2 have just got, they've got translated into very successful films. One into an Oscar winning, and the second one into, into a series.
A 9-part web series called The Great Indian Murder on Disney Hotstar.
Yeah, but did you all know about that? So the kids at the back, they've come completely prepared. And so I want to know, how does your whole... How do you form your plot? How does it just become... he's the only visual writer. I don't think that there are many writers. I've had conversations on the books and off books with people like, Shashi Tharoor. And definitely Raj Kamal Jha, and then recently with Lakshmi Puri. But how your books are so unique, and why, and how, what goes in your mind that you create something that ye film wale aake ekdam kehte hain yahi project hai. Aur ab now this one Alia Bhatt may star it, inshallah.
Yeah. Look, many people have told me that my writing is very visual. And it is true in the sense that I first visualize that scene in my head and then I sort of type it out onto my desktop. So from that point of view, because I have already visualized that scene in my head, in my writing also, that visual streak probably comes through. And that's why when you read the words, on the page, you can also visualize that same scene because the cues are already there. And when a filmmaker wants to translate what I wrote onto the screen, I suppose that translation and the transition becomes easier because, as I said, the writing is very visual. Having said that, it's not that when I'm writing, I'm already thinking, oh, tomorrow this will be a web series or a film, so let's put in elements which will make it more appealing as a web series. Because then I think neither will I write a good book, and neither will it be even made into a film or whatever. When you write a book, you have to write a book. If you want to write for the visual medium, then you write a screenplay, as simple as that.
But you never considered writing for films?
No, I mean, I have been made some offers, but I recognize that it's a technical thing. And see, the one big difference I find between writing a screenplay and writing a book is, when you write a book, it's entirely 100% your vision. It's you decide what you want to write and how you want to write, and you write it. But when you are writing a screenplay, it is writing by committee. You know, you just cannot say, okay, this is my screenplay. Then look at any Hollywood screenplay. It says screenplay by so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and the last name will be that of the director, you know, who was also added his 2 pennies worth. Because there, you have to write based on what the studio wants. You know, oh, this does not have enough violence, please put in some violent elements there. Oh, the love angle is very underdeveloped, please develop the love angle more. So it's not really your vision. It's the studio's vision being filtered through your prism. But eventually it's not your story. It's the story that the studio wants you to tell. And I think I like the freedom that you have as a novelist, which you probably don't have as a screenplay writer. Yes, maybe you earn better money and things like that, but then, you know, you're also hemmed in by so many other factors, which that freedom you don't have, you know, as a screenplay writer, which you have as a novelist.
So no producers and directors have reached out to you?
No, they have. As I said, there is one person who's very active.
Please tell us who.
No, I don't want to reveal any name, but, you know, he wants to collaborate with me, and he's pitched 2 or 3 ideas to me that, you know, we'll work jointly on a screenplay. And even for the new one, I have been told that, you know, I could be an executive producer and I could write the screenplay for this one. So let's see. I mean, these are not matters that are decided instantly. I will mull over these things, decide whether that's the right route for me to go or not. For the moment, I'm happy that the book is out and the readers are enjoying it and relating to it.
We'll come to the book in a bit, but before this, we need a little warm-up. So, as Kamal Amrohi says, that बात से बात निकलेगी और देखें कहाँ तक जाएगी, कब किस तरह
निकलेगी तो
दूर तक जाएगी. So दूर तक जाने के लिए आप शुरुआत करते हैं. And I want to ask you that what was the mahal in the room? What was your experience? You know, I mean, it just gives us the goosebumps that, you know, that you go straight and you're sitting, मतलब आम लोगों के साथ नहीं बैठे हैं. I'm not even with Shah Rukh Khan, at least is a global star. You've produced books which have become global brands. Who were you sitting with in that room where the Oscars were being nominated and Slumdog became the brand that was created by Vikas Swarup?
No. So I was sitting in a room with, it had Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt and, you know, Kate Winslet. And I mean, the Oscars is really the royalty of the film world, you know. So anyone who's anyone, you know, everyone who's anyone is in that room, because as simple as that, the Oscars are the crowning achievement for any filmmaker, anyone connected to the film business. Because even if you're nominated, you know, forever your credits will say Oscar nominated actress so and so, or Oscar nominated actor so and so. You know, so Oscar is a ultimate seal of approval of the film industry that yes, you have reached a particular level in your chosen profession. So it was a surreal experience for me. I mean, if you Google me, Vikas Swarup at the Oscar, or just Google Slumdog winning Best Picture at the Oscar, you'll see lots of pictures. First of all, it's a big fat Indian wedding happening on the stage. 25 people are on stage for the final award. And there is one guy in a black bangala. Everybody is looking at the camera, but there's one guy in a black bangala who's looking at the ceiling. And that's me, wondering what is a professional diplomat doing in the Kodak Theatre. So really, I mean, that was this thinking, how the hell have I landed up here?
Did you invite your bosses for that?
You can't invite anyone because even the nominees just have one guest that they can bring. Can you imagine? Danny Boyle brought his mother. Kate Winslet brought her mother. Even the nominees can only bring one person. It's a total of 3,000 people, I think, who are invited to the Oscars. I think about 1,000 of them are in the main hall. Maybe 2,000 are in the balcony levels. And that's it. The total guest count is, I think, not more than 3,000 people. So it's a very, very exclusive affair. And of course, very tightly controlled by the studios, because the Oscars are really owned by the studios, you know, Fox and 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers and all these studios, they control.
Share some funny conversation where you, as a diplomat who can manage everything, you've sent many people to hell. What were some interesting conversation that you had with some?
There was not to, I mean, in the sense, the good thing about the Oscar is that it's very democratic. There is a red carpet, which only the stars are allowed to walk. You walk on the side. And, you know, I'm walking next to Daniel Craig. And I say, my God, James Bond is walking next to me. You know, I mean, it was that kind of a thing. But once you cross the red carpet and you are, you know, close to the Kodak Theatre, then there is no distinction between you and the stars. Brad Pitt is a guest, you are also a guest. There are no handlers, no bouncers, no bodyguards who can prevent you from meeting anyone. So that was happening. I mean, we were walking and the, you know, the slum kids who had participated in that movie, they were walking next to me and they saw Meryl Streep there. And they go up to Meryl Streep and they say, ma'am, can we get your autograph? And Meryl Streep turns to them and says, maybe I should be getting your autograph. So I couldn't resist. I said, Miss Streep, I wrote the novel. And she said, really? So it was a very, very interesting experience. And the Oscars happen exactly like they show you in the movies, on the TV, that you have 10 minutes of ceremony and then there is a break when advertisements are shown on your TV screen and nothing is happening in the Oscars at that time. So basically people are networking. So that's what was happening. Anil Kapoor was sitting next to me and every 10 minutes when there was a break, he would go and he would network. He would start chatting with Will Smith, or because they were all there, everybody was there. And right on my left side was Prince, you know, the famous singer. And I remembered that, you know, his name is a glyph. He's the artist formerly called as the Prince. And I said, how do I address him? Mr. Artist formerly called as the Prince, or what? I mean, I just couldn't gather that courage and I missed out. And, you know, he died a few years after that. So it was an amazing experience. But the best moment for me happened after the Oscars had ended. Everybody was going off to the, you know, governor's ball. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California at that time. And after the Oscars, there's the traditional governor's ball, where the governor hosts all the winners and the losers and everybody is there. I was not going for the governor's ball because Aparna, my wife, who had accompanied me, was waiting for me at, you know, Hollywood Boulevard from the after party. So I was desperate to get back to Aparna. I was already away from her for 6 hours. And I blundered the wrong way out and I found myself in Jennifer Aniston's makeup room. Yeah. And Jennifer Aniston is there and she was just taking off her makeup and, you know, getting ready to sort of leave. And she saw me and I was the only one in a black bangala. You know, everybody else went in a black tie. I went in my diplomat's black bangala. And the only thing I had with me was a copy of Slumdog Millionaire. Nothing else. I didn't have a camera. I didn't have a recording device. I didn't have a cell phone. Nothing. So she looks at me and she says, oh, so you are the man. And I said, yes, I am the man. And then we had a very nice 10-minute conversation where she said, you know, how much she loves India and how she's into yoga and whatnot. So it was really, I really felt that that was the first time India had arrived at the world's greatest entertainment stage. Because before that, you know, Bollywood was just seen as these Hollywood people as something that the Indian diaspora watches and they do a lot of song and dance about it. But they didn't really give it any importance. It was always given short shrift. And this time at the Oscar, because of, thanks to Slumdog Millionaire, you had a performance of Jai Ho by A.R. Rahman, you had Frida Pinto give an award. I mean, you really felt that India had landed on the world's greatest entertainment stage.
You group, that's quite fascinating. So we're all gone into, see, I told you he's a visual writer, but he's also a visual filmmaker in making. We all have just gone to that room with the red carpet.
I'm open to offers of directing if there are any directors here and any funders.
There's one possibility that could happen. So you grew up as a child in Allahabad and you're so aware and you grew up in this whole Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb. Did the Hindi, because of course it's a hardcore Hindi speaking heartland, did Harivansh Rai Bachchan, did you intermingle with
Yes, yes. In fact, Harivansh Rai Bachchan, my grandfather, Babu Jagdish Swarup, was his lawyer. So we had Mr. Bachchan visit us many times. We have recordings of his singing the Madhushala, you know, on those spool tapes. We still have that. And I still remember my grandfather, when he became the Solicitor General of India, he brought me with him to Delhi. I was his favorite grandchild and I went to St. Columba's school. So I'm probably the only person who has shared a school with both Amitabh Bachchan, which is Boys High School in Allahabad, and Shah Rukh Khan, who went to St. Columba's in Delhi. So I remember here, Mr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan coming and telling my grandfather that Amitabh has just got a nice role in a film called Anand. that scene is still vivid in my mind. His coming in and telling that, and of course, I saw Anand after that. And then, of course, that was like the starting point for Amitabh Bachchan's journey, and then he became, the mega superstar that he is today. So, growing up in Allahabad, a lot of my formative influences were actually Hindi literature. I grew up reading a lot of the, writing in English that I read was by Western writers. In fact, it was entirely by Western writers. I had not read Arundhati Roy, I had not read Vikram Seth, I had not read, Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan was probably the only book I had read. But I had not read Indian writers in English at all. All my reading was Hindi writers. So whether it was Harvansh Rai Bachchan, in fact, I was in grade 4 or 5 and I had read all of his books. Pravas Ki Diary, Neel Ka Nirman Phir, Kya Bhulun Kya Yaad Karun, all of them I had read. I read all of Premchand, I had read all of Upendranath Ashk. In fact, Slumdog Millionaire was partly inspired by Ila Chand Joshi's novel Jahaz Ka Panchi, where the lead character is a guy who really goes from place to place. It's a very picaresque kind of an adventure. And that's the same kind of a trajectory that Ram Mohammed Thomas in my novel follows. So a lot of my formative influences were formed by reading Hindi writers in the original language Hindi. It was only when I was living in London and I decided to write a novel, then I said, let's test out what have Indian writers in English written all about. And that's when I read Arundhati Roy and Raj Kamal Jha and Pankaj Mishra and Manil Suri and Raja Rao and all these writers I read. And I discovered two things. Because you see, because I had a lot of mystery and thrillers growing up, I wanted to write a thriller. So I said, I want to understand which are the best thriller writers in India. And I went to this, I was in London at that time, so I went to the Golders Green Library and I said, give me the best thriller writers by Indian writers. And the librarian looked at me very blankly and said, I don't know a single Indian thriller writer. So I said, okay, then what do Indian writers write? And then she gave me 25 books by Vikram Seth and Arundhati Roy. So I read all of them. And I discovered that all of them have written only about society. Not one of them was a thriller. But I was still wanting to write a thriller. But I said, unless I write about society, the book won't go big. So I said, I'll marry the two themes of writing about society and writing in a thrilling kind of way. And I created this genre which I call social thrillers. So
this is so true. In fact, this was my leading question. That when all of us who read books, and some of us read more, I read less these days for whatever reason. Now we're doing, because we're in the business of doing this now all the time. So, so Mr. Swaroop, when whenever you go to a bookstore, when you're really looking for a book, a fiction, you never actually see any big name in the Indian, fiction side, because most of the authors, fiction, you always want an international name. There hardly anyone. I'm not.
There are lots of. If you go to any Indian bookstore, the Indian fiction list, I think, is pretty vibrant and pretty robust.
But international acclaim, or people who reach the international circuit,
that is limited. I agree. That is limited.
So you just have Salman Rushdie, or you have Khushwant. Definitely, Khushwant Singh would be one. Vikram Seth, and I would say Naipaul.
Arundhati Roy, yes, Naipaul. Yeah, but you see, many of them.
Why do you think
many of them are diaspora writers, and the diaspora fiction is very different from Indian fiction, because diaspora fiction is, I think, preoccupied with issues of identity, displacement. Because for many of those diaspora writers, their image of India is fixed to the time when they left India. So if Rohinton Mistry left India in the 1970s, he writes about India of the 1970s because that's the only India he knows. After that, he has visited India only as a tourist. So for him also to get the DNA of the modern aspirational India would be slightly problematic, I would imagine.
Good writing is hugely influenced by the geography also that you come from. And you've traveled all across the world. You've experienced different, diverse geographies, very diverse languages. And I would say, you look at writers like from Africa or Latin America, and definitely then completely different, like from Japan, and also Chinese to a large extent. Do you think that in India, largely, people coming from which geographies really do justice to very good writing?
No, look, I think it's a difficult question to answer, because unless you have experienced all the geographies and the writers from all those geographies, how can you make that comparative assessment? But I think, everyone is rooted to the place that they come from. So certainly that filters into their writing, whether they are writing about that particular place or not. I mean, Namtaji was saying how, having been born and brought up in Nainital, always filters into her writing, whether it's the Devdars or the mountain peaks or the local customs and traditions, that always filters through. I have tended to write about cities. I am a city writer. I have never really lived in a village. So that's why I do not want to write about a village, because I will lack that depth and that intellectual integrity to write about village from a very convincing point of view, because my probably image of a village will be the Yashraj village, Yashraj Chopra's village, white mustard, yellow mustard fields fluttering in the beach, village bells going with, matkas on the head and things like that. But, a lot of other things happen. Very dark things also happen in villages, a lot of jar, joru, jameen, as they say. These are the three main drivers for murders and things like that. So a lot of other stuff also happens in the village. But having said that, nothing stops you from writing about a village, because that's what I love about fiction, the freedom that it gives you. And to create that sense of authenticity, you just need to do research. I mean, when I write about Dharavi without ever having visited Dharavi, it came through from the research that I did. In the latest book also, I'm writing about neurosurgery. I'm writing about, the fake degree racket. I'm writing about juvenile justice homes, etc. So all that, without having visited these places myself, if you do a lot of research, I think research can really help you create an authentic background.
So, especially you've traveled, you've lived abroad all your life, you've been a career diplomat. Now, I've gone through all your interviews. I've read everything you've said. I've, through your interviews and everything that you've done and shared with media. One thing that I really want you to today on this platform, how do we make it unique, is by sharing what is your unique style of writing. Especially, are you also inspired to some extent by conflict areas, because diplomats somehow have exposure to exposure of being there and so on and so forth. So
no, look, I think all fiction is driven by conflict. The only difference is in diplomacy you are exposed to actual conflict, wars happening between countries. Like when I was posted in Ethiopia, the Ethiopia-Eritrea war was happening. In my first posting in Turkey, I was sent to rescue Indians fleeing the first Gulf War. So as a diplomat, you have actual experience of seeing a real conflict. But fiction is about the internal conflicts. Your characters, they all have some kind of a conflict or the other. Because without conflict, there is no resolution. It's the conflict that are being resolved through the medium of fiction. So I think all fiction thrives on conflict. And books which have no conflict are very, what should I say? They are very surface reads, because nothing is happening in those books at all. You're just probably capturing a conversation in time or something like that. But nothing is really happening. But when you have conflict, then the reader is curious, how is this conflict going to be resolved? And that gives the reader, a hook, so to speak, on which you are pegging the whole novel. And the resolution of that conflict becomes eventually the central feature of the novel. So conflict is very important, I think, in fiction.
So your style of writing would be a combination of?
No, my style of writing is...
How would you define your style of writing?
As I said, I call my book social thrillers, where I decide on a particular subject. You see, India is a very, very complex country. It is easily the most complex country on the planet, just simply because of the levels of differentiation we have. I mean, every country has the rich and the poor divide. That's a common theme in even the Nordic countries have, the rich and the poor. But in India, beyond the rich and the poor, you have the divisions of caste and class and, subcultures and stuff like that. You have whole lot of other stuff going on as well. So India is a very, very complex country. And when you write about India, you are only touching, 0.00001% of the Indian reality in a sense, isn't it? So what I try to do in my novels is to try to capture slightly more of the Indian reality than you would get from a single narrative. Let's say you write a novel about people living in this area of Nainital. Now that would be a very, very, very small subset of the Indian reality, because it's not even the reality of whole of Uttarakhand. People living in Nainital do not represent all of Uttarakhand. In Uttarakhand also you have various subdivisions and various sects, etc. happening. So what I try to do is, my style is that I try to create a multi-layered narrative, where my characters are going from place to place, so you capture some of the geographical diversity. And then my characters are either interacting with or themselves, becoming upwardly mobile, and tapping into different strata of society. So, for instance, in my second book, Six Suspects. Now, this is a murder mystery written from the perspective of 6 different people who are all suspects in that murder. And one of the suspects is a Bollywood actress, a very rich Bollywood actress. One of the suspects is a mafia don masquerading as a politician. One of the suspects is a lowly mobile phone thief who manages his day-to-day affairs by stealing mobile phones and selling them on the black market. One of them is the Andaman tribal who comes to mainland India in search of a stolen relic. One of them is Larry Page, an American from Waco in Texas who comes to India in search of a mail-order bride. So the idea is you look at India through 6 different eyes. Because the India of Larry Page is very different from the India of this Bollywood actress. And the India of the Bollywood actress is very different from the India of the mobile phone thief. You know, what you look at depends on where you are looking at from. If you're sitting on a high perch, you know, your viewpoint is very different from when you are sitting down in the dumps. So that's what I try to do. That in my fiction, I try to capture slightly more of the Indian reality than you would through a single or a unidimensional narrative. So I like to create what I call polyphonic narratives, where different characters are coming to you, you know, with their own stories. In this particular novel, the latest one, you have Devi, who undergoes a series of metamorphoses. So she starts off as Devi, then she becomes Deepa. From Deepa, she becomes a Muslim girl, Deba. From Deba, she becomes a Punjabi girl, Dasmeet. From Dasmeet, she becomes a South Indian Deepthi. From Deepthi, she becomes a Christian Diana, and from Diana, she becomes an all-purpose, you know, where you cannot identify the religion at all, Dolly. And Dolly is the, you know, is the all-Indian girl, you know. You don't know Dolly is Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, is she from the north, is she from the south. Dolly is Dolly.
So I'm getting the signals, but I ain't taking 5 more minutes. I mean, we have Vikas Swaroop. So, you know, the canvas is so large, how can we just... So and we've not even started talking about the book.
This is just the Oscars. I'm also a writer, and there are lots of 30 other writers here. We are all treated the same.
Sure. So, The Girl with the 7 Lives. What's the plot of this book? What's the narrative of this girl that you're trying to share?
So the issue was, you know, I wanted her to tell her life. And her life is very, very interesting. It's full of intrigues. And, you know, her character is very different from the character of Ram Mohammed Thomas in my first book, Slumdog Millionaire. Ram Mohammed Thomas is a very goody-good character. He has a very strong moral compass. He knows exactly this is right, this is wrong, and I will only do the right thing. Devi of this novel is a much more complex character, where she knows what is right and what is wrong, but she is not averse to doing something wrong also, because she has a strong sense of justice. If she feels that, you know, this man deserves justice, then she is not averse to even killing that person. Murder. She is ready to go even to the extent of murder. So for me, the challenge was, how can I create a character who is morally dubious at times, who is very, very complex, and yet make her interesting enough and compelling enough for the reader to still want to identify with her. That even when she does a murder, you know, you don't blame her, you say maybe she was justified, you know. That was the challenge for me. So from that point of view, it was a tougher book to write than Q&A. Because Q&A, I mean, a safe book is a very easy book to write, you know. You create a lovable, character and send him on a picaresque adventure, and the reader would want to identify and follow that person. But when you create a complex character and yet get the reader to identify, that's slightly more challenging. So when the novel opens, Devi has been kidnapped from the beauty parlor where she works in Mumbai. And now she's being held hostage in a dingy basement by a masked gunman. His identity is revealed only at the very end. So she has no clue who this person is. And he's saying, I'm putting up your life for an online auction. I want you to confess to all the crimes that I'm accusing you of. You have to confess, and if you make any lie, because I already know it, I have hired a private detective who has delved into your life, and I know the full lowdown, I just need you to confirm it. If you deviate, I shoot you dead. So she has to proceed to give him what she calls the mother of all confessions, in which she lays bare her entire life. And at the same time, she's trying to get out of the situation, you know, trying to free herself from the constraints under which she has been kept. So that's the whole idea. So it operates at 2 levels. One is the backstory of her lives, you know, each of her 7 avatars, what she undergoes in each of those 7 lives. And the second is what is happening in the basement, you know, where this online auction is happening. Because a theme of this book is, every time she's reinventing herself because she's trying to escape her past. But in that online auction, the past is catching up with her. And all the people that she has wronged in her life, they are the ones bidding for her life now. Because, as she says, there's nothing more visceral than taking revenge. Revenge is the ultimate motive for human behavior. And you all want to, okay, somebody who wronged me 20 years ago, now I have the chance to, equal the scales. Will you take the chance, and how much are you willing to pay for it? So that's really what this novel is all about.
Wonderful. Wishing you good luck for the novel. But just switching back to a little bit of diplomacy and a little bit of politics, just for the flavor. Mr. Swaroop, you've been, again, I would say, being a diplomat, traveled everywhere across the world. How do you perceive India today, from the global view, politically and as a diplomat?
Yeah. No, look, I have actually seen the evolution of India, because when I joined the Indian Foreign Service way back in 1986, India was really seen as the sleeping elephant. And we were routinely lectured to by the West, either on Kashmir or on human rights or whatever. Nobody took us seriously because our economic reforms had not happened. We were just seen as a country with middling prospects, growing at the Hindu rate of growth, 3.5% per annum. That was about it. And look at the way things have changed now. India became the fastest growing major economy in the world. We are now accepted easily as the world's largest democracy, and the whole world is making a beeline for us. Plus, look at the boom in Indian soft power. And I have seen that. Chicken tikka masala being declared the national dish of Britain, and interest booming in all things Indian, from Indian curry to Indian cuisine to Bollywood to Bangalore. Everything Indian is celebrated now all across the world. So the whole image of India has changed. India is now seen as a major pole of the multipolar world, and I think we are only set to go higher and higher. I don't think there is anything which can take us down. We can only go higher and higher.
And the last question, so why this Indian diaspora, you spoke about the Indian diaspora, why the Indian diaspora is in such desperate despair in Canada? In Canada, only I'm talking about Canada. And what is the origin of this discontent? If you were in that...
I would just say India-Canada relations have historically been overturned, or what should I say, have been accident prone on account of just two issues. One was the nuclear issue, because Canada was the first country that gave us nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. So they felt betrayed when we had, first of all, the 1974 peaceful nuclear explosion, and then the actual explosion of 1998. Canada felt betrayed. But that circle has been squared now, because Canada in 2015 actually signed a contract to deliver uranium to us. So the nuclear issue was successfully resolved. But the second issue has always been the Khalistan issue. And that was the embodiment of that became the 23rd June 1985. Air India Kanishka flight was blown up. 329 people died. Majority of them were Canadian citizens, even though they were brown-skinned people, but they were Canadian citizens. That inquiry was completely botched up. And I think since then, that Khalistan issue has bedeviled the relationship. And again, it's the same issue that has knocked the bottom out of the relationship at the present moment. But look, in diplomacy, nothing is constant. Everything changes. Eventually, I'm pretty sure Canada is a G7 country. India is a G20 economy, fifth largest economy in the world. There is no way the two democracies can remain estranged forever. Things will change. It will just take some time.
Uday has got a little bit of quote for his for NewsX, because of course the television is covering it. So I wish we really had more time and we could take questions, but we could do this now. So we can do this later. Okay. But thank you very much, Mr. Swaroop, for giving us the time. We wish you good luck, more books. And one thing which is very special about his writing is that his writing is like, as if he's writing a series. And when you read his book, it's like that you're flipping the pages of a newspaper. And that's what he said, and I think I'd like to conclude with that. And anything.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambreen. It's my pleasure, as I said, to participate in Himalayan Echoes. Thank you, Janvi, for giving me this wonderful platform, and look forward to meeting readers over the signing.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.